even before Kellen Moore was officially hired, when he was still speculated to be the next Saints head coach, Saints fans, Saints media started asking questions about what's going to happen and how is it going to look like. And it's continued all the way through draft, OTAs, minicamp. I know I've been keeping track of a handful of them, hoping to find some answers, but I think we have. And break down a few of them right now. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. My biggest takeaway is I think, I don't think, I am basically 100% sure that Kellen Moore, this coaching staff, uh, even the support staff, the training staff, everyone kind of came in with a plan. These guys are not flying by the seat of their pants, which is something I felt happened a lot in the last few seasons with the previous regime. But going all the way back to when he was initially hired in his first press conference, there's just been little nuggets of insight. And like I said, I think it's almost unprecedented. I can't remember Saints coaches who will occasionally, like he has done, just really break some stuff down. But he started with scheme and philosophy even back then. It was a little coach speakish and a little vague. If you remember back to that press conference, but there was some stuff in there that was real substance that he's expounded on throughout the offseason process. I can remember NFL owners meeting. Normally it's Mickey Loomis going there and sitting at a table and speaking to the media. Well, Mickey was still back in New Orleans and it was Kellen Moore. And this is the first time I can remember hearing when he's talking about the three phases, which basically phase one was strength and conditioning. Phase two was the organized team activities, the rookie minicamp, the OTAs, the mandatory minicamp that they just finished up this week, all the way into phase three, which is actually training camp. He's referenced several times all these phases, and even yesterday when they were supposed to have their last OTA practice, and he gave them the day off as kind of a team bonding experience. When he spoke to the media after on basically looks like a Zoom call, he so much broke down and said that was a planned day off, that they in almost like a carrot and stick situation, they were getting the carrot because they had done everything he asked them to at the high level of expectation that he had on him. And he also recognized building the foundation of this team starts with the people and the fact that they do need to come together as a team. And something else I did not feel like was going on a whole lot the last few seasons, where everybody, players, coaches, from the top of the organization all the way down to the very bottom, were all pulling in the same direction. And I think he's made a point of that in starting there and then moving through phase one, through phase two, and getting ready for phase three. He actually has a little clip on it, or I have a little clip of when he was speaking on it yesterday to the media.
Team, you got to connect everyone. And so we started there, built a really good foundation in the weight room. I thought Ted and that group did a phenomenal job of just building on a really good foundation of just creating really good habits in there. They worked their tails off, and we feel like we saw a lot of growth in the weight room from a lot of our guys, whether it be from a weight training or a speed proponent. There's a lot of different growth there, and so that was really good. And then once we got to the football.
And just to reference that, that was the very beginning of the process following the draft. And that was completely voluntary. And that was the one, if you remember, why I was talking about first the reference to phase one at the owners' meeting. He was asked about, and specifically at the time, Derek Carr, about who was going to participate in that. And he was expecting full participation. And he pretty much got it. There were very few of the veterans that weren't there. And most of those were the guys that had their own offseason training regime. And I don't think it was particularly a big deal to anyone that they weren't there. But for the most part, you had a very high percentage of attendance. And Ted Rath got the first shot at looking at these guys and getting them prepared for what I would say that we also learned. He's pretty good at least getting players through an intense series of practices of OTAs and minicamp, including the last few in some insane heat, and getting basically the whole roster intact. And I think that's a credit to both Ted Rath and the players doing their part of the stuff they need to do to protect themselves based on what Ted Rath is trying to do.
Football aspect in phase two, um, is really about building a foundation from a schematic standpoint and really focusing on the fundamentals, the details, and building the sound foundation for us from a scheme perspective. And so I feel like we're there. And, the really the main objective moving forward is to just continue to keep growing and keep building through training camp.
Keep building through training camp. So phase two, and that's what they just wrapped up. The football aspect of it, stressing and repeatedly, we've talked about this because he's talked about it almost every time he's met with the press after an OTA or minicamp practice, and he referenced it again later in this press conference. The teaching aspect of it was really important. Really needed these players to get the schemes down, the techniques, the understanding of what they're trying to accomplish, build on that, and getting into minicamp. And we talked about this in some previous videos. The situational aspect of the football. Okay, now we've got the schemes in, we've got the base concepts, they've got an understanding of what they're doing, they've done their individual work on their techniques. We're still not full 11 on 11. They stress staying in 7 on 7 through this because it wasn't so much about the physical that's coming up in phase 3 in training camp, but it was about the mental. So much to the point of how much they structure this and how much of a plan they have. This one caught me totally off guard. I'm not going to play the clip. It's a little further on, but it's just a little short blurb where somebody asked them, said, notice during walkthroughs, none of the players are wearing their helmets. Why is that? And I'm thinking, as the question's being asked, I'm thinking because it's hot out there and it's a walkthrough. Actually, what Kellen Moore said was, we want to stress the teaching aspect of what's going on in our walkthroughs. We don't want any situation where any of the physical or contact can come in and accidentally, even because that's not what this is about. It's about the teaching component, and we want to reinforce that. I don't know if that works or not, but the thought process of thinking that out, look, that wasn't a made up BS answer, because if it is, then he's got one of the fastest minds, because question was asked and it was answered with an answer that makes absolute sense on something that I'm thinking when the question's being asked. Why are you asking this? It's nothing. When you're talking about a plan or a process or trying to get players to buy in, even little things like that, attention to detail of what we're trying to do. And in this case, what he's basically saying is focus on learning what you need to learn. And we don't need you butting heads accidentally out there and causing problems and having guys miss time, because it's important that we're all out here learning through a session that's basically based on teaching. He was asked a little later on in the press conference, basically about players, because they're getting a break now. This is now that the OTAs phase 2 OTAs minicamp portion is over, about a month and a half before they have to be ready to go for training camp. And he was asked about that, and I found his response very, very, very interesting.
Is there anything you want your players to take through this stretch? Being prepared, keeping in shape, that sort of thing.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that in our team meeting today. Just as far as you just got to keep building. I think that's the biggest thing. Is there's certainly growth opportunities throughout this entire summer. You want to recharge. You want to get to have the opportunity to spend some family time and all the good things that come with a little bit of a summer break. But from a physical standpoint, these guys got to keep building, keep getting better. They got to spend some time from a football perspective preparing themselves so that when we hit training camp, we're just continuing to build. We're not going back to step one and rebuilding this thing from the beginning of OTAs. We are continuing to build, and that's when you got to take big leaps and bounds when you continue to grow each and every day.
I think the big takeaway from that, it's a continuation of the building. We're not going back to like it was day one of OTAs when we opened training camp. It's almost like there is no day one of training camp. It's day, 22, 23 of practice, because that's basically what they've been doing through OTAs and minicamp. I found this very interesting because this can go one of two ways with the players. If you stop and think about it, they do what they're expecting them to do. Because remember, Nothing, even by rule, I'm pretty sure, nothing is going to be going on as a team aspect between now and when training camp opens. So it's up all on the players. And now he acknowledged that, look, everybody needs to recover and some rest, including him, because he's basically been nonstop since the Super Bowl because we immediately hired him and he was going headlong into this, that they all need time with their families, understanding that. But they also have a job to do in that time, that it's not we're turning it off and going to turn it back on. We may be throttling it down over the next month and a half, and we're going to throttle it up right where we left off when we start up again in training camp. And you want to talk about the carrot and the stick. This is what I find interesting on this. Previous coaching staff, I felt like was all carrots. If they had a stick, they never really used it, as far as I could tell. Supposedly they did, but I don't know. Now he gave him the day off after that last OTA for the which he considers, and he talked about several times in here about the team building aspect of it and getting the people together, the coaching staff, the support staff, and the players themselves in bonding, and that is important because they're trying to rebuild the culture while they're trying to rebuild the team, honestly. But when you show up in training camp and you're expecting everybody to hit the ground running, what's going to happen to players that don't? And that's going to be the fundamental question. Now, I know this was mostly about answers, and so I can't answer this in the definitive, but I believe this. I just do the way that he's setting all this up, or they're setting all this up, because he'll admit it's not me. It's all of us trying to figure this out. If they need a stick, they'll have a stick ready. And one of the things that the Saints, and let's whether it was by design or by accident, where we're at, and as far as the front office is concerned, we are in the situation of training camp where the stick could very well be, you're done, you're cut. We are in that position now. We haven't been able to do that for years. So I think it's a whole new perspective, a whole new attitude. So I do believe, if necessary, they will go that route. But I think what he's trying to do is, I don't ever want to have to use the stick. I want you to be aware of it, that I've got it there. But if I do what I'm supposed to do and you guys do what y'all are supposed to do, the real carrot, the real reward is going to be, we're going to play better as a football team. We're going to win more football games. Kind of ultimately the goal, isn't it? I really do believe that we've learned that whether it works or not, we don't know. But they're not flying blind on this. They have a well thought out process and plan that they're trying to get the players to buy in. And so far, it seems like we have some buy in. Those are all good things. That's the foundation that we need. That's the start we need. I feel like this is no longer what we had in the previous coaching regime, which was, just roll it back, continue to keep doing what we're doing, but finally a full acknowledgement of, no, that it's not going to work anymore. We have to make changes, but not just for the sake of making changes or pulling stuff out of thin air. I'm as a fan really starting to buy in on the process that they brought in, because again, I think that they're not grasping at straws. They have a clear purpose and idea of what they're trying to accomplish. I think that, and they kind of coincide with each other, and there's a lot of video clips involved that explains both what's happening with the offensive line and the offensive scheme, and the defensive line and the defensive scheme. But every now and then, even when he was talking about something else, there would be a little hint about what's going on. I think the biggest takeaway, and we've known this now, I think, just because it is constantly reinforced every time somebody asked about Trevor Penning moving to guard. How's Banks looking on the left side? How's Fuaga doing? McCoy's the leader of the offensive line. These are all series of questions that have been asked in many different ways, but it's basically all the same types of questions. And what we learned is, and this ties into what we were just talking about in the first segment, they have a plan. And the plan, without a doubt, is Banks, Penning, McCoy, Ruiz, and Fuaga. And we've talked about this before, but it is continually being reinforced. And when he's talking specifically about some of the players involved, That's where I think we know what this scheme is going to kind of be based on, because he talked about day one press conference being a balanced scheme between zone blocking and gap blocking, emphasizing the run with play action pass component mixed in, use of RPOs, and he's been asked about that specifically the last couple of press conferences, and he's dived into that, going absolutely, and even tying into the fact that it's a little different, or a lot different actually. He said little in the RPOs and how you put them in because of the lineman going downfield component and getting caught and winding up with a penalty and taking back a play. But he has not wavered from any of this. And one of the key takeaways that I didn't kind of realize this until I was going back through, uh, literally, I only showed you a portion, the mountain of notes I've been writing, when he talks about stuff, when stuff has been presented from the media, from the portions they go to practice. But near as I can figure, those five from day one were put in those positions and they have not wavered from that. There's been no, sort of like we saw last year, this guy getting some work here and this guy running with the ones and then shuffling this guy to this position. Now, he's acknowledged that will happen at some point, and because he's acknowledged at some point you're going to be forced to do it. That's just the nature of the NFL. But right now, that is not the focus. The focus is those are our five. We've got, and I don't necessarily know that it's a complicated scheme, but it is going to be way different than that wide zone heavy scheme we were running with Kubiak last year. We're going nowhere unless these five guys can figure it out, and then we can start working on the other stuff later. And we're not really going to know that this is going to work out until we get into 11 on 11 situations, till we get into some preseason games and whatever else the training camp and the preseason is going to entail. It's guesswork right now. I mean, it really is. But what they're saying is, look, this is the plan about when we are going to ramp up the physical portion, move it away from, and not really move it away, but I don't even want to use de-emphasize. I don't know the correct word right here, but I guess transition from the knowledge that we're trying to import, the teaching that we've been talking about these last 3-4 weeks, to putting it into practice, no pun intended. So they better know that teaching component, that scheme component, that technique component, because when you're flipping back and forth between gap and zone, even inside zone, which I'm guessing, and that's the one thing we don't know, but it seems an awful like they're doing a lot of stuff that they did in Philly last year. Philly was gap and a lot of inside with some wide zone mixed in. I feel fairly confident that's what you're looking at here. And it has been nothing, as far as I can tell. The starting five is the starting five. We're not shuffling them around. They are going to get this stuff. They're going to get this scheme backwards and forwards. And then we're going to turn them loose into some more live or actual live contact drills and go, okay, where are we sitting at this point? So heavily tied from segment one to segment two when you're talking about what's going on with that offensive line and how it ties into the scheme. I think we're fairly confident what's going on there. And really and truly, I kind of have this listed as two separate answers, but in a way, it's the same answer because we know the same thing about the defensive line. There's been no whatsoever break from, and he actually said this in his press conference after day two of minicamp. About 5.5 minutes in, he specifically used the phrase, I am quoting, by rule, we are a 3-4 defense. It does not get any more definitive than that. Now, the question had been asked about Brzee, probably more to the three technique. And that's more or less what he was addressing. But while he was talking about that 3 technique, he started getting into, and full disclosure, perfectly honest, do understand, like when you're talking about the 3 technique, basically that interior guy more or less over the offensive tackle, but there's overs, there are unders, and I know that has to do with alignment, inside shoulder, outside shoulder, all that kind of stuff. Well, he was going into heavy detail. And the thing is, I do know this, that even though the 3 technique is basically the 3 technique, which is all in the vicinity, let's say, of that offensive tackle, whether your head's up, outside shoulder, inside shoulder, those technique change, whether you're talking about a 3-4 or a 4-3. Maybe subtle, and it may not be subtle, depending on what you're talking about. And this is getting out of my area of fully understanding, be able to explain it to you other than the concept. It's the same, yet slightly different. And that's what he was focusing on. And the more he talked about that stuff in detail, because he did get a little detail about it. And look, he's not giving away trade secrets. Everybody in the NFL knows this, whether you're running an even 4-3 or an odd 3-4. But that's telling us, okay, we're rolling with the guys we got and going to try to figure out a way. Once again, here's the plan. Can we get him in that defense? Now, I'm not saying that it's going to be a pure 3-4 because I don't think it will be. The nature of most 3-4 defenses in a few years, and Vic Fangio last year in Philly put the emphasis on how you do this, where as part of the scheme of the by rule 3-4, you will present some even man fronts. And when we do that, odds are the defensive lineman we have, that's going to be, for the most part, probably a little easier technique and a little easier play for him. But I thought going in, there could be, if you remember back when we hired Dennis Allen after getting rid of the Ryan, I forget, I always get mixed up if we had Rex or Rob, doesn't really matter. DA kind of had a little hybrid thing, and he got it to work until he made the full transition to 4-3. And then that was really our heyday years with Sean and Dennis together towards the end of the 20 teens. So I don't know if I was expecting, but I was kind of guessing we were going to see some of that till we transition the roster out. And it's no, we're going full, for better or worse. We're going 3-4. You're seeing some buy-in in that because it's been talked about several times. Granderson and Young getting lighter, getting the ability to be, I don't want to say less physical, but the need to be less physical so they can be more explosive coming off that edge. And we talked about in the last video that he specifically mentioned about them getting some width. And that immediately pops in your head a wide 9 look, which it is in use in a by rule 3-4 defense sometimes, where you're really kicking that edge guy out and trying to stress that offensive tackle. So this feel like this has been asked and answered a couple of different ways. And then when he added the by rule, we are a by rule 3-4 defense. That's what we are. Now, in these last two, when we're talking about the offensive line and in the blocking schemes and the defensive front, odd man 3-4 by rule, and kind of how the line's going to work in that. And not to mention the off the ball linebackers, which we're basically talking about the guys in the middle and some changes that's going to make. But I'm not too worried about that. I think Werner, Davis, Stutzman looks like he's probably going to be the third guy if from what he's put out there so far in this the phase 2 aspect of all this. But we'll see how it plays out once that gets physical. But I think really that front 3 interior guys and whoever's on the edge, it's, I don't want to say set in stone, but the way we're going to play it is set in stone. Figuring out, can they do it? Can we get them to do it? And it's a lot like the offensive line shuffle, but it's a lot like what we're talking about. There is a plan on how they're going to try to do this. Now, will either work out? Well, there's more questions because honestly, I don't know if those questions can be answered in training camp, be answered at some point in the season, or we're going to have to wait till all 17 games are played and then figure out what worked and didn't work when it comes to these two. I can say this as a wrap up. Right now, the way these things are kind of playing themselves out, what we've seen so far and what we've heard, and then putting the two together. And whether we're seeing it directly in clips from practices or seeing it through the eyes of the media who are at practice and visualizing this, and then getting into a press conference with Kellen Moore afterwards and asking him about it, and then getting his answers. A lot like we showed some of the clips in the first part about how I think the plan's in place. And so far, I think it's a good one as far as we can tell. All this is going to play into each other. And as I'm kind of rewatching these clips, trying to find answers to some of the other questions, I don't know if they're really there, but I feel like we can get a pretty good idea once training camp starts. And that's kind of the point of me doing this, is going, okay, this is the next phase question. What are we going to be looking for so we can feel comfortable, kind of like we are with, at least so far, the process, the offensive line, the defensive line, and the schemes that both of them will be running. I have to end it with this. One thing that I've learned that I struggle with as a Saints fan, but I definitely learned this. We're going to have to develop some patience, even though we want all the answers now and, full blown know what is this going to look like? How good can we be, or how bad will it possibly turn out? And again, I just have to go back. We may not know till all 17 games are played. So that's it for today. And like I said, be on the lookout for don't quite know what I'm going to call them yet at the video titles and as such. But basically, some of my unanswered questions. Let's talk about those and see what it could look like, possibly. It's going to be the speculative portion of the off season, but I think that's just where we're at right now. So if you're first time here, you like what you saw, please go ahead, give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. So we have been we've been making the algorithm love us. Been growing some growth in the channel, and do expect kind of everybody, the coaching staff and the team, are taking a little bit of a pause right now, taking a breath and recharge a little bit. But they still have some work to do in anticipation for training camp. That's no different from someone like me. So uh, we will be maybe a little shorter on videos than we normally are through this, unless something happens. And it could, because there's still a chance we could be bringing in some free agents during this period, especially as training camp gets closer. And I expect, we've had some guys come in to work with the team. Akers being one of them, Cam Akers. Others we're looking at that have come in from visits. So you may see some motion on that getting into July and closer to training camp, I'd imagine. So there could be some emergency or some unplanned videos popping up at some point for those. So make sure you got your notifications checked. So till I see you next time, I'm Tim. Peace out, and who dat.